Professor Baum is a very well-known criticism of Quakery, and he will tell us about research and Quakery and pitfalls of research, and particularly allude on the Saatchi case. The floor is yours. Very, very welcome to have you here.
Just the next and previous.
That, which way up? That way up, okay. It's lovely being in Amsterdam. I always love coming here, and I've already spent time in the Rijksmuseum and the Van Gogh Museum. My happiness is complete, apart from getting this out of the way. It's a great honor to be invited to the Dutch Society Against Quackery. I want to introduce you to the founder of my university, Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham founded our university about 150 years ago, and he was a skeptic, an atheist, and as such, UCL has always found a place for people like myself. It was, when it was founded, called the Godless College of Gower Street. Gower Street is where it stays. Now, after he died, in his will, Jeremy Bentham asked that his body be dissected and then put together again and dressed in his finery, and can be seen at the entrance to our university to this day. He called it his auto-icon. The only problem is that the head rotted, and so they put a waxwork head in its place. And on special occasions such as this, they bring the original head out of the freezer and put it on display. And I always have this imagination of a conversation going on here, and Jeremy Bentham saying, "I don't understand the title," and his head saying, "Me neither." So I have no idea what that means, and it doesn't actually matter, because I'm going to talk to you about what I want to talk to you about, whatever the title might say. The history of anti-quackery in your country goes a long, long way back, long before your society. I'm a great admirer of Dutch art, and one of my favorite artists is Gerrit Dou. He was a pupil of Rembrandt, and this is his famous painting called The Quack. And here he's lampooning these simple people and the quack doctor. It's a very big picture, and it's a gorgeous picture. Yesterday at the Rijksmuseum, I saw another lovely picture by Jan Steen, also the quack. So for a long time, Dutch artists of the Golden Age were painting pictures lampooning quacks. But if you pause for a moment, in the 17th century, what was the alternative? What the proper doctors offered was no more effective than what the quack doctors offered. So that gives us a pause for thought. Now, we're all quackbusters here, but as quickly as we try to suppress them, they're trying to break out from the no entry sign. And for the first time ever, I've come to a meeting like this and to find that there were people on the door handing out literature. It's never happened to me before, probably for good reason, the name of our society. Here is a brief history of our society, which was founded in the 1988, probably 100 years after your society was founded. And in this history, it claims that the idea behind Health Watch was first put to journalist and broadcaster Nick Ross in 1980s by myself. And Michael told me about some tragic cases of cancers being treated by quackery and having horrible, horrible, untreatable, uncontrollable disease. Now, unfortunately, we ended up with the title Health Watch, which actually doesn't mean anything. That's probably why nobody protests outside our meetings. We wanted to be called Quackbusters, but someone had already got that name. We then decided we wanted to be the Campaign Against Health Fraud, but then we were told we couldn't be a charity if we were a campaign, so we ended up with this rather banal title, Health Watch, whereas the Dutch Society Against Quackery is fantastic, and we're not allowed to use that. Now, although the history suggests that I was very influential because of my experience with poor cancer patients treated with quackery, this is the real reason I'm so anti-quackery, and that's because of the failure of anything to cure my baldness. I've tried it all, and nothing works. My little run-in with the Prince of Wales has already been mentioned. Now, the Prince of Wales, how shall I put it politely, is very outspoken in favour of alternative medicine. And I first had my public run-in with him. This is my second fight with him. About in 1984, when he was promoting quackery at, or he called it ancient wisdom. Those were the words he used, ancient wisdom, which included therapeutic enemas, homeopathy, all that ancient wisdom, and so on. At the 150th anniversary of the British Medical Association, that was my first public run-in with him. And then in 2004, it started all over again, very high-profile position by the Prince in favor of alternative medicine and so on. And the BMJ invited me to write an essay politely telling off the Prince of Wales. Now, that's considered lèse-majesté. You're not allowed to do that. And so the title of my essay, With Respect, Your Royal Highness, You've Got It Wrong. And I published that in good faith, and the sky fell upon me, and the rapid responses were quite extraordinary, thousands of rapid responses, and it was about 50-50 for and against the Prince, or for and against me. It, of course, lost me my knighthood, and my wife never forgave me. She always wanted to be called Lady Judy, and she's just Mrs. Judy. And yet we're still together 50 years later. Very recently, under the Freedom of Information Act, we were able to get hold of private correspondence between the Prince and ministers of state. And these were called the Black Spider Memos, because his handwriting is like black spiders, and his memos were always written on top of letters to and from the minister. And there he is writing one of his letters, and under the public interest, he wrote the letter to the Secretary of State for Health, Alan Johnson, saying, I cannot bear people suffering unnecessarily when a complementary approach could make a real difference. Here he was promoting homeopathy. This is totally inappropriate for a member of the royal family to intervene in government decisions. And this is what he was trying to do, to influence the Department of Health in favor of alternative medicine. Fortunately, he's not taken very seriously. There are a few senior clinicians who suffer from night starvation. That means they want to be knights of the realm, and so they're going to keep their head down and be polite to the royal family. But broadly, he's not very influential, and he is not taken seriously. But someone who is very influential and is taken seriously is the one I want to talk about, Lord Saatchi. This is Lord Saatchi here, an amiable, avuncular man, and his lovely late wife, Josephine Hart, who died 4 years ago. She was an authoress, and by all accounts, a lovely lady. They were deeply in love, and she had a terrible death from ovarian cancer. As a result, he was a very distressed widower, and frankly, the most charitable thing I can say about him is that he is deranged by grief. Anyway, he set out to find the cure for cancer by changing the law. Now, he is a dangerous fellow. He is very rich and very powerful. He is the head of Saatchi & Saatchi, the biggest public relations advertising agency in the country. He's the biggest donor to the Conservative Party. And this poster, Labour Isn't Working, was a very, very famous poster talking about unemployment under the last Labour government. Labour isn't working. It's very clever, very, very catchy. I must emphasize, by the way, I'm not wearing a red tie as a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn and our Labour Party. I'm wearing it for, it matches my shirt. That's the... But the tragic irony of all this, his other very successful campaign was for silk-cut cigarettes. His campaign probably contributed to more deaths indirectly than any other campaign in the history of advertising. And yet, he believes that there is a change of the law is what is needed to find the cure for cancer. I want to quote, I've got to turn this around so I can read it myself, the premise behind the Saatchi bill. And this is taken from Hansard, June 2014. Hansard is the official journal of the Houses of Parliament in the UK. Now just listen to this rhetoric. Those condemned by cancer suffer a worse fate than the worst mass murderer. Whilst they await execution, they are tortured. For them, hair loss is good news. Less good news is that their treatment regime, the drugs and the cycles of their administration and the surgical procedures are often 40 years old. They create the same symptoms as the disease: nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, and fatigue. A beautiful woman's legs turn into elephant's legs. Her arms begin to make a heroin addict's arms look attractive, and the bosoms turn into raisins. That is before the bad news, the discovery that standard cancer treatment does such damage to the immune system that the cancer patient is quite likely to die from fatal infections such as MRSA, Escherichia coli, and so on. And now, this is in red. The principal barrier to the development of new treatments is that to deviate from standard treatment was to invite litigation, and doctors could thus not innovate because they feared being sued for doing so. So here we have an extraordinary statement. I apologize for reading it out. You would not believe that this was a speech in our House of Lords. This whole paragraph is an attack on the medical profession. It's a polemic, and it's the kind of stuff that you hear by the proponents of alternative medicine attacking oncology. And what is his solution? That there is fear of innovation because of legal risk. Simply not true. The bill is based on a false premise. And I want to draw your attention to this, 40 years old. No progress for 40 years is what he's saying. By extraordinary coincidence, 2 years ago, I was invited to give the plenary lecture at the 40th anniversary of the British Association of Surgical Oncology. I was one of the founder members of that organization, and I was given an honor to give a talk about 40 years of innovation. A remarkable coincidence. Lord Saatchi spoke before the coffee break about his bill, and I had no concept what it was about. He was a deeply upset man, and he made us all feel very sorry for himself as he was lamenting the loss of his beloved wife. And then he promised us he would do something to facilitate our work in the future, and he got a standing ovation. He didn't say what it was. I met him in the coffee break because I was speaking after the coffee break, and he was very affable, and we chatted nicely, and he gave me a copy of the bill to look at. So I thanked him, and of course, like all great men, he didn't stop to hear me talk after the coffee break. This is common. The really, really great people haven't time to listen to the common people like ourselves. Had he have listened to me, he might have learnt a thing or two. In my subject in breast cancer, in the last 40 years, we've moved from radical mastectomy to breast-conserving surgery and intraoperative radiotherapy. We've reduced mortality by 50% by the development of tamoxifen, aromatase inhibitors, adjuvant systemic therapy. We've identified the gene for BRCA1, BRCA2, and we can now prevent breast cancer. Mortality from breast cancer has fallen by 50%, and the quality of life of women for breast cancer have improved beyond imagination. That is no progress in 40 years. Therefore, we need to change the law. Sorry, I got carried away there, Mr. Chairman. I read the bill. I was utterly appalled. I interpreted it as a quack's charter. I have a very dear friend, a close friend, Lord Turnberg, sits in the House of Lords. And that afternoon, I went to see him, and I talked about the bill. He said, yes, Mike, Maurice Saatchi is an awfully nice guy. I said, he may indeed be an awfully nice guy. Have you read this bill? And he said, yes. He used to be president of the Royal College of Physicians. And I said, what do you think of it? He said, it's terrible, but don't worry, it will never get passed. Well, it certainly got past the House of Lords and got to the House of Commons. 3 readings in the House of Lords, then it started being debated in the House of Commons. Meanwhile, we had organized ourselves. There was a bunch of quackbusters, concerned lawyers, concerned physicians, senior members of the oncological establishment, and we formed the Stop the Saatchi Bill collaboration. And Alan Harness, one of our members, is brilliant on putting stuff together on blogs. And we fought the bill on blogs, on Facebook, on Twitter. Alan put together this beautiful cartoon strip, which truly, although it's kind of comical, it truly describes the consequences of that bill. Patient diagnosed with anything. Doctor doesn't like the treatment, throws it away, and so on. I won't read it out. It's step by step, taking the bill apart and explaining how everyone will benefit, and look at the dreams of money and cars, everyone benefits, including the quacks, but eventually no good comes of it. The law, as framed in the Saatchi Bill, is framed in such a way that the Belito, there are 2 premises in the law protecting the patient. I won't go into the legal niceties, but as far as the medical trials are concerned, the patient is protected. Before you can do randomized trials, you have to go through an ethics committee. you don't have to go to lawyers. The lawyers have no say in it at all. You have to have rational treatments. You have to have equipoise within the scientific community. You have an independent an independent ethics review, and whilst the trial is running, you have an independent data monitoring and safety committee. At every step along the way, the patient is protected under the current law. Never once in 40 years of running multi-center controlled trials involving tens of thousands of patients over 11 countries, and this is my experience from our clinical trials center at UCL, never ever once have we been threatened with litigation. I've been I'm independent chairman of the prostate screening trial. I served on many data monitoring and safety committees in all sorts of subjects, and never ever once has there been a fear of litigation. It is a complete falsehood. And yet, by the power of his wealth and authority and his advertising capacity, he's persuaded the law lords, who ought to know better, that the fear of litigation inhibits cancer research, inhibits medical intervention, innovation. Therefore, we must change the law so that anybody can try anything for anybody, and it is, without question, a quack's charter. Now, this is, if it wasn't so sad, it would be comical. This is what it says in the Saatchi bill about research. Why is research specifically excluded from the bill? It is vital that the bill does not facilitate reckless experimentation nor allow patients to be used as laboratory mice. The bill excludes the use of treatments specifically as just research. It allows only for treatments that are in the best interest of the patient. Best interest of the patient? They've never given it before. How do we know it's in the best interest of the patient? However, this does not stand as an obstacle to the furtherance of medical knowledge. And this is the real interesting line. In trying novel treatments in the best interest of the patient, it is likely that new and successful ways of treating disease will emerge. Innovation emerges. How does this happen? Well, I'll tell you how it happens very easily. Here's the mythical construct. You're well aware of it. The patient is only given 6 months to live. And under the Saatchi bill, the patient only has to have 6 months to live. That's the entry criteria for these novel treatments. The patient's only got 6 months to live. He dies in 3 months. Ah, pity he didn't come sooner. He dies in 6 months. Well, he had nothing to lose. He dies in 12 months. Success, he gained an extra 6 months of life. And there we have, and this is, again, scary, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, of course, you and I would interpret it this, in the absence of a control group. He dies in 3 months. Well, the treatment killed him. He dies in 6 months. The treatment shortened his life, and he may have an impaired quality of life in his time on Earth. He dies in 12 months. That might have been the natural history of untreated disease, and the time and money spent on fruitless interventions like the Gerson therapy denied him enjoyment of fine food and alcohol in the company of his family, and also dignified death. That is also a way of interpreting the data. But no, if we did it that way, it meant we were experimenting on the mice, the human mice. So, I think I might even have got this slide from you guys. It's a good slide. It's red flags of quackery, how you can spot quackery. Now, there's a reason I'm showing you this. Amongst all these red flags for quackery, here's a good one: hostility to criticism. They can't cope with criticism. I orchestrated a letter to the Times, the main newspaper, signed by 100 oncologists. All the professors and senior academics in the country signed a letter to the Times saying, stop the Saatchi bill. This will help us in no way and will endanger patients' lives and inhibit research. Now, Saatchi didn't take that kindly at all. And this is how he responded to the letter. Cancer patients are dying because of our Downton Abbey treatment system. The 100 doctors who wrote to the Times rubbishing my medical innovation bill are the authentic voice of complacency. Let us help them to move on. He went on to say that we should read this letter over the graves of our patients who have died of cancer. What sort of people do these 100 people think we are? Are we downstairs at Downton? I take it you know about Downton Abbey. Are we downstairs? Are we supposed to doff our cloth caps that these doctors go past us in Harley Street, drawn in their horse-drawn carriages? It's ironic because the majority of those people signing that letter were full-time professors who had no private practice privileges at all. But this is the kind of man we're dealing with. He's petulant, he cannot take criticism, and he's using his power and authority and money to drive his horse and carriage through any rational argument. So what does this come down to? I like to distill this into a simple concept, and it's to do with the philosophy of science. I'm an amateur philosopher of science. And I start from this beautiful central image of Raphael's The School of Athens, and it's a beautiful fresco in the Vatican, but this is the central two images, Plato and Aristotle. Plato is putting his fingers up to heaven, and he is saying wisdom is provided to us. It comes from above. We are tabula rasa, and the wisdom is absorbed. Aristotle is a much more earthy man, and he says, no, we struggle to find wisdom. It is not received, it is as a result of study. The two approaches we're comparing to epistemology of medicine, that's the growth in knowledge of medicine, are effectively inductive and deductive logic. Inductive logic was considered to be science until the days of David Hume in the very early 19th century. And it can be looked upon this way. You collect observations, you build a hypothesis, and then you collect corroborative evidence to support the hypothesis, which is translated into dogma. And that's, broadly speaking, is what we mean by inductive logic. And just to illustrate this again, with a well-known example, you may remember Dr. Issel's Alpine Clinic. He was a notorious quacker about 20 years ago, and he had a clinic in the Swiss Alps that the wealthy used to go to. And the only evidence he was able to provide kind of broke down in this way. Here we have 3 hikers walking up an alpine mountain. They've all got advanced cancer, and they were only given 6 months to live. This one drops dead at the foot of the mountain. It's a pity he didn't come earlier. This one gets halfway up the mountain, gets out of breath, sits down, and dies. He didn't complete the treatment, which involves 3 episodes of mountain climbing. This one gets to the top of the mountain, goes down, gets up and down, and so on, and lives beyond 6 months. And she is the one that is the proof that Dr. Issel's works. I know it's it's so naive to tell an audience the danger of anecdotal evidence, but it is incredibly powerful. And for the layperson, the unsophisticated, scientifically illiterate group, like the Houses of Parliament, that's the way they think. And again, the patient was given only 6 months to live, but defied the doctors and took snake oil and lived to a ripe old age. And this is what we call urban myth. There are no such patients. There may be patients with a median survival of 6 months, but we never tell a patient, you're going to die in 6 months. That's January the 30th. Mark that in your diary. I mean, it's stupid. No one ever does that. Here is a beautiful example of an anecdotal evidence. It's an old slide of a patient I looked after many years ago, about 30 years ago. It's an old slide, but it tells an interesting story. This old woman was admitted under my care with a head injury at the time when I was a general surgeon. And I want you to notice she's got a fractured clavicle and a radical mastectomy scar. So she'd had a radical mastectomy and radical radiotherapy. And when we asked her about that, she said, yes, that was done 30 years earlier. And here she is alive and well. But my junior doctor had overlooked to examine the contralateral breast. I examined the contralateral breast. It was full of cancer. She had a huge lump. I said, how long have you had that? She said, 28 years. Well, why didn't you do anything about it? Well, I didn't like what they did on that side, didn't I? So here we have an anecdote that will prove that radical mastectomy cures breast cancer or doing nothing cures breast cancer. And that's true. And that is, in one woman, the hazard of anecdotal evidence. Now, the alternative to inductive logic is deductive logic. And I'm a self-confessed Popperian. I gave the Karl Popper Memorial Lecture at the LSE a few years ago. And the Popperian approach to science is falsificationism. Sure, you build your thesis, but the important thing, there's an antithesis, and you do experiments where you hazard your thesis. So the hazard of falsification. Inevitably, you will falsify your best ideas, unless we're the Almighty. We all have imperfect knowledge. And that very process of falsification of your original thesis leads to a revised thesis and a revised antithesis and so on. So the journey of a scientist is a journey. You never arrive, but you constantly approximate to the truth. And science is good at rejecting falsehoods and having temporary beliefs in what may be true. Science is a very modest discipline. And in clinical practice, what we're actually doing is we're building a hypothetical model about the nature of disease, therapy, and that suggests therapy A. Other experts build an alternative model, conceptual model of the nature of the disease, and that suggests therapy B. In the years, 30 years ago, when we were fighting against radical mastectomy, we were actually comparing radical with conservative surgery based on two conceptual models of the disease, one that believed in an anatomical approach and another that believed in a biological approach. You compare the two treatments randomly to avoid any kind of any bias. You get new clinical insights, and this then goes on. It's a never-ending quest. And I've been privileged to be involved in randomized controlled trials of the treatment of breast cancer sequentially since the first one I started in 1970. So I've been in it a long time, and I've been privileged to be part of a large international collaboration which has chipped away at the problem with modest incremental progress until today. We won a campaign medal, the Stop the Saatchi campaign, through blogs and the social media. We slowed up the bill passing through the House of Commons until it ran out of time. We did this for nothing. Saatchi had plowed millions into his campaign, and we achieved, we thought we'd won, and it cost us just our time, and we were awarded the Skeptics Occam's Razor Prize for that. But the zombie has arisen. Here's Quackometer, one of my favorite blogs. The Chris Heaton Harris MP resurrects Lord Saatchi's Zombies Quacks Charter. And just put before the House of Commons is Saatchi 2, masquerading as Heaton Harris's MP bill of medical innovation. And I'll just show you a picture of a zombie. It's a never-ending battle. So a new chapter has opened in our fight against the legions of evil. I was going to end that lecture then, but I just wanted to provide you an epilogue. As a result of, there were 4 of us skeptics having dinner last night, and it reminded me of this story. In 2005, I had the poison chalice of chairing a commission funded by the European Society of Mastology to come up with guidance for the role of complementary and alternative medicine in the management of early breast cancer. And to do that, I had to chair a meeting of proponents of conventional medicine and proponents of alternative medicine. You will recognize Ed Zardones. I think he has spoken to you. So he was a member of this committee. And I want to point out Jackie Filchi, who was a very nice lady, an anaesthetist, but secretary to the British Acupuncture Society. The first half of the day, it was wasted talking about the meaning of words. We couldn't agree on complementary, alternative, CAM, integrative. It was just a semantic debate. Last night over dinner, we couldn't even agree on the meaning of therapy, and we were all on the same side. So that was a waste of time. But in the end, we did agree that we were all in favor of virtue. We were all in favor of being kind to patients. And we were all in favor of educating the students about CAM. Of course, what we would teach them, what the quacks would teach them, would be entirely different. But that's not the point of this anecdote. The point of this anecdote, in the 2 weeks leading up to this meeting, I was suffering with the most awful sacroiliac pain, just there. I was limping, I was in agony. And sharing that first day just made it worse. At dinner, I was sitting next to Jackie Filchi, and she said, "You look in pain." I said, "I'm in pain. Got this terrible sacroiliac pain." So she offered me acupuncture. Now, the next day, half a day's work, the next afternoon, my wife and I walked around the Uffizi Gallery for 2 hours. I had no pain whatsoever. Of course, the catch in the story is she offered me acupuncture. I didn't accept it. Imagine I had accepted it. I wouldn't be standing in front of you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very eloquent and inspiring lecture. And well, now you will experience some of the Dutch polder politics. We have to ask them to ask you questions.
Yes, yes. As long as it's in English. My Dutch is very rusty.
De vragen mogen in het Nederlands, als moet het. Well.
Thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. I'm a psychiatrist from Holland, and I was just curious, but maybe you don't know, what happened. You said something about Saatchi in a kind of mourning situation, that he might be confused now since his wife died so badly. But do you know any specific things that happens in her treatment or her illness that might have created this in him?
Yeah. The physician, the medical oncologist treating her, I know very well, and he was one of the 100 experts who signed the letter to the Times. And Saatchi took that very badly and threatened to take him to the General Medical Council, as if it was unethical that he should sign this letter, although he never said that he was the physician. It was a rare and very aggressive ovarian cancer, and it did not respond to chemotherapy, and she was one of these unfortunate patients who had all the side effects and none of the benefits, which are sadly inevitable. So what he did, poor man, and we do feel deeply sorry for him, he generalized from his experience, or we call a trial N equals 1. But that he should claim that he alone was suffered because a wife had died or a close relative had died annoyed many of us. I had to stand by and watch my mother die in pain of metastatic cancer, feeling very guilty that I wasn't to help her. Almost everyone I know in their extended family have had to witness this. But what this should do is not curse the doctors. We should curse cancer, and we should be galvanized into doing better. And certainly the experience I had with my mother had a lot to do with why I am so angry and passionate. But I'm angry and passionate not against the doctor, but I envision cancer as an enemy which has to be fought. Yes, he was a grieving, and I still think grieving man. And in that respect, I do feel sorry for him.
Now, here in Holland, we are always, as a Society Against Quackery, complaining about the Dutch Medical Association or the Society of General Practitioners not taking a firm stand in this discussion. I'm wondering what the role of the British Medical Association is in this kind of threat.
We're all on side.
Sorry?
Everyone is on side.
Okay,
The BMA, all the Royal Colleges, the Royal College of General Practitioners, all agree. Every one of our scientific organizations and colleges signed up against the Saatchi bill. Every single one of them. So it is very, very different here in the UK to what it appears to be here. Yeah. And yet, he's going to get that bill through. Because, as I said, the Houses of Parliament are scientifically illiterate. Yeah. There's only, I think, 2 people in the Houses of Commons that have scientific qualifications. There are about 50 in the House of Lords. But a tiny minority.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I don't think this will be the last time that we will invite you here in the Netherlands, because we are facing judges who are advocates of Quakery, and fortunately we don't have a guy like Lord Saatchi yet, but we have tiny lords with wet feet.
Yes.
Thank you very much again, and we'll see you back after interval.